He stepped into the spotlight, perhaps thinking he had the upper hand. With confidence that felt more rehearsed than rooted in reality, he aimed to challenge her intellect, her stance, and her presence. What he didn't realize was that the person standing across from him was not just another political opponent. She was someone forged in the heat of real debate. Someone who'd spent her career not only learning the rules, but mastering them. From the moment she responded, it was clear that this wouldn't go the way he imagined. Her tone was sharp but controlled. Her facts lined up like a courtroom argument, and her delivery was laced with both clarity and charisma. She wasn't there to match energy, she was there to make a point, and every sentence landed like a well-placed jab. There was no yelling, no grandstanding, just precision. You could see the shift in the room almost instantly. What started as an attempt to corner her became a display of just how unprepared he was for someone of her caliber. What made the exchange so compelling wasn't just that she was right, it was that she was ready. Her responses weren't defensive, and they weren't angry. They were informed, rooted in experience, and delivered with the confidence of someone who's had to prove herself 10 times over just to be given half the credit. She wasn't performing, she was asserting. There's a difference. And that difference is why the moment became bigger than the conversation itself. She pulled from policy, precedent, and personal insight with ease, connecting dots in real time, while dismantling weak arguments without even breaking stride. It was a live demonstration of how dangerous it is to underestimate someone just because they don't fit the mold you're used to. She didn't rely on theatrics, she relied on truth, and that, more than anything, is what shook the room. The free thing about confidence is that it has to be backed by something, and in this case, his wasn't. He stepped in assuming that a louder voice or a sharper tone might dominate the discussion. What he encountered instead was someone who had done the work, who carried the weight of lived experience, and who had no interest in playing along with the shallow provocations of political theater. Her confidence wasn't just visible, it was earned. That kind of presence doesn't come overnight. It's built over time, through battles both seen and unseen, in rooms where she's been talked over, underestimated, and dismissed. So when this moment arrived, she met it with the full weight of everything she'd carried before. And it showed. Every word she spoke didn't just counter the weak points being thrown her way. It elevated the entire conversation. She turned what was meant to be a rhetorical trap into a spotlight moment for herself and for anyone who's ever had to push back twice as hard just to be heard. In those few minutes, she didn't just defend herself, she redefined the space. She made it clear that this wasn't just about political differences. It was about being ready when the moment demands it, and she was. Every rebuttal she gave showed depth, not just in terms of knowledge, but in emotional and cultural intelligence. She knew the stakes, she knew the game, and she played it better. The result wasn't just a win in the moment, it was a revelation. Watching her, you got the sense that this wasn't a one-time occurrence. This was the product of someone who's always had to be over-prepared just to be taken seriously, who's had to study harder, speak louder, and carry more weight just to stand at the same podium. And in this exchange, all of that work paid off. What she demonstrated was what readiness really looks like. Not the showy kind, but the grounded, strategic kind. The kind that doesn't buckle under pressure. The kind that turns someone else's challenge into a platform for truth. And that truth, delivered with confidence, clarity, and undeniable authority, is what left such a lasting impression. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't fumble for facts, she didn't flinch. What she did was deliver a masterclass in composure, intellect, and strategy, one that audiences won't soon forget. From the very first sentence, she controlled the narrative, weaving together sharp wit and undeniable substance with the ease of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she stands for. This wasn't a reaction. It was a performance rooted in principle and confidence, executed with finesse. There's a difference between a clapback and a calculated dismantling, and she offered the latter with grace and force in equal measure. Her words didn't just push back, they sliced through noise, deflection, and weak logic like a scalpel. She wasn't just responding to a moment, she was building a case in real time. Every phrase was backed by facts, every pause purposeful, and every shift in tone a deliberate reminder of the control she held over the exchange. The beauty of her delivery lay in how much it revealed without theatrics. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic outbursts. She had facts, and she had clarity, and when those two things are combined in the hands of someone who knows how to wield them, the result is powerful. She reminded everyone watching that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and absolutely unshakable. The authority in her voice wasn't manufactured, it was earned. There was an art to how she handled the moment. It wasn't just that she responded effectively, it was that she elevated the conversation with every sentence. She didn't stoop, didn't deflect, and didn't allow the discussion to be dragged into the muck of petty insults. Instead, she rose above, making it clear that her focus was on truth, impact, and accountability. Her words moved with intention, cutting through the surface and getting to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. She drew upon her background, her knowledge of the law, her understanding of policy, and her personal experience to shape a response that was not only persuasive, but powerful. Her ability to think on her feet, recall relevant information, and present it with authority made it clear she was not just reacting, she was leading. In those few moments, she shifted the balance of power, not through aggression, but through articulation and control. That level of presence doesn't just appear. It's cultivated over years of being underestimated, of being told to stay quiet, of being challenged in ways that others never are. It's the product of showing up, again and again, in spaces that weren't built to welcome you, and refusing to shrink. What she displayed in that moment was the result of deep preparation and deeper resolve, a quiet, commanding force that said more than volume ever could. Every word she delivered resonated because it was anchored in something real. You could hear the clarity of her conviction, the weight of her experience, and the sharpness of her insight. She didn't need to overstate her points because the truth of them spoke loudly enough. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about standing firm in purpose and refusing to be diminished. The energy she brought was one of confident defiance, not the kind that relies on spectacle, but the kind that comes from knowing your worth and being unafraid to show it. Her responses had rhythm, but they weren't rehearsed. They were grounded, measured, and undeniably impactful. She knew the terrain she was standing on, and she knew how to command it with every word she spoke. It was clear that this wasn't new to her. The posture, the poise, the pointed articulation, it all pointed to someone who's had to do this before, someone who's been called to defend not just ideas, but identity, integrity, and intellect. And in doing so, she reminded the audience that there is something deeply powerful about preparation meeting purpose. She didn't just clap back, she redefined the moment, turned it into a showcase of what happens when knowledge, passion, and confidence collide. She set the bar and did it without breaking a sweat. And while others may have expected tension, what they got was a tactician at work, calmly deconstructing each flawed point, exposing the hollowness of empty arguments, and leaving no doubt about it happens time and time again. A powerful, intelligent black woman enters a space of debate or discourse, and her presence is underestimated. Her intellect is dismissed, her credentials ignored, her composure tested. Yet, over and over, she meets these moments not just with resilience, but with brilliance. This pattern is not just unfortunate, it's telling. It reveals the deep-rooted biases that still plague political arenas and public discourse, where stereotypes are weaponized and assumptions are made before a single word is spoken. What many fail to realize is that black women are often the most prepared people in the room. They've had to be. Navigating systems that weren't built to include them has required not only excellence, but constant overachievement. So when one steps into the spotlight, there is no room for mediocrity, no margin for error. She doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. She doesn't get to fumble and recover with ease. She has to be sharp, quick, informed, and ready to defend not just her position, but often her very right to speak. And yet, despite that pressure, she delivers. Every time. Because she knows the stakes. She knows what it means to represent more than just herself. Her words carry the weight of communities that are often misrepresented or unheard, and her presence challenges the norms that have shaped the political landscape for generations. She has no choice but to be exceptional, and she meets that expectation with remarkable consistency. What's striking is how often this dynamic plays out in real time. A challenge is presented, often under the assumption that she will falter or fold. The questions come loaded, the tone patronizing. But instead of shrinking, she steps up. And when she responds, calm, confident, commanding, the atmosphere changes. Her brilliance is undeniable. Her poise, unshakable. She doesn't just respond, she leads, she teaches, she dismantles. And she does it with the kind of clarity and control that comes from years of being doubted and dismissed. This repeated underestimation reveals more about those issuing the challenge than it does about her. It shows a refusal to recognize the complexity, capability, and power of Black women in public life. It reflects a system still reluctant to respect those who refuse to conform, who stand unapologetically in their truth. It speaks to a political culture more comfortable with performance than with substance, with hierarchy than with equity. But what they don't seem to learn is that underestimating her doesn't diminish her power. It magnifies it. Each time she's doubted, she rises higher. Each attempt to corner her becomes an opportunity for her to shine, and the public sees it. The audience, both in the room and watching beyond it, recognizes the imbalance, and it only reinforces the strength of her performance. Because when someone's whole presence is doubted before they open their mouth, and then they proceed to dominate the conversation with facts, fire, and finesse, that's a spectacle of its own kind. That's victory on a deeper level. The resonance of these moments isn't just personal, they're cultural. They speak to a larger truth about where power has historically resided and where it's shifting now. They show that representation isn't just symbolic, it's strategic. It changes the tone, the narrative, and the outcome. And when a Black woman commands space that others tried to deny her, it sends a ripple far beyond the exchange itself. It also serves as a reminder to those watching, especially young women of color, that their voices belong at the table, and that not only can they hold their own, they can lead. Her example becomes a blueprint, her performance a testament to what's possible when brilliance refuses to be boxed in. In a world that often tries to minimize, she expands the frame, reshapes the conversation, and sets a new standard. So when people underestimate her, they reveal the limits of their own vision. Because what she brings is not just knowledge, it's power, earned and honed through experience. And when she stands firm, unbothered by the noise, and makes her case with precision, she doesn't just win the moment, she exposes the system that thought she'd lose. The moment didn't just land, it reverberated. It wasn't because it was flashy or filled with chaos, but because it felt real, genuine, grounded in something deeper than the usual political noise. That's what made it go viral, what made people stop scrolling, replay the clip, and share it across timelines with words like "finally" and "this is what leadership looks like." It wasn't just about the exchange. It was about everything that moment represented. It was clarity cutting through confusion. It was truth pushing past performance. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of timing and control that made every sentence feel intentional. Each pause, each pivot, was loaded with purpose. She wasn't just speaking to the room, she was speaking to everyone watching, everyone who's ever felt dismissed or overlooked. And she did it with a calm intensity that didn't demand attention but commanded it. That kind of presence doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of experience, of having your voice questioned so many times that you learn exactly how to sharpen it. People recognize authenticity when they see it. That's why the moment took off. In a sea of carefully packaged sound bites and hollow outrage, her delivery stood out because it was rooted in something solid. She didn't need theatrics. She didn't rely on insults or volume. She relied on truth. On knowing what she was talking about and being unafraid to say it clearly and forcefully. That combination, truth, confidence, and control, is magnetic. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a moment of truth-telling that cut through all the posturing. She looked into the eyes of power and didn't blink. She stood her ground, spoke, her piece, and left no doubt about where she stood or why. And what made it so impactful wasn't just her command of the facts. It was the grace with which she delivered them. The sense that she wasn't trying to prove herself, but rather remind everyone that she had already done that long before she stepped into this moment. There's a certain energy that happens when someone speaks from a place of lived knowledge and moral clarity. It's not performative. It's not desperate to be liked. It's rooted, and it resonates. That's what the audience felt. That's what made people stop and say, "Watch this." Because in that moment, she wasn't just answering a challenge. She was embodying a kind of leadership that's often overlooked but desperately needed. Her voice wasn't trembling. Her argument wasn't shaky. It was measured, grounded, and exact. Every point she made landed with intention, and it wasn't about dominating. It was about correcting the record, setting things straight, and refusing to let misinformation stand unchallenged. And it was that refusal, not just to be silenced, but to be mischaracterized, that struck a chord. Because it wasn't just personal. It was political, cultural, generational. It reminded people of what real accountability looks like. Not just calling out what's wrong, but doing it with clarity and composure. Not stooping to petty attacks, but rising above them with substance. That's a rare kind of power, and when people see it, they respond. Not just because it's refreshing, but because it's affirming. It says that truth still has a place, that strength doesn't have to shout, that leadership can look and sound like this. What also resonated was how comfortable she was in her skin, in her words, in her purpose. She didn't shift to make others comfortable. She didn't water down her message. She delivered it as it needed to be heard, direct, unapologetic, and exact. And in doing so, she not only controlled the moment, she changed the narrative. She reminded everyone that being prepared, being principled, and being real is more than enough. And that's why it stuck. Because people are tired of political theater with no substance. They're hungry for honesty, for strength that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. She gave them that. She showed what it looks like when preparation meets courage, when someone uses their voice not for applause but for impact. And it landed not because it was rehearsed, but because it was real. What happened in that moment wasn't just about a single exchange. It was a reflection of a broader shift happening in political and cultural spaces. It was a reminder that when you bring truth to power with preparation, confidence, and authenticity, you don't just win an argument, you reshape the conversation. That moment resonated not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. It peeled back the layers of performance we so often see in politics and exposed something far more powerful: clarity, courage, and control in the face of condescension. She didn't ask for permission to speak. She didn't wait for validation. She stepped into the space with authority that had been earned, not given, and she owned it. That kind of presence is disruptive to systems built on exclusion, and that's exactly why it matters. Every time someone like her commands attention with truth and precision, it forces a reckoning, not just with individuals, but with the structures that have long underestimated voices like hers. Her performance in that moment went beyond rebuttal. It served as a beacon for what leadership can truly look like: grounded, principled, and unapologetic. And that example ripples outward. It tells young people watching that intellect and identity are not mutually exclusive. It tells communities that they are not invisible. And it tells those in power that they will be held accountable, clearly, boldly, and with evidence. What made the moment go viral wasn't just the clash, it was the calm. It was the fact that someone stood in their truth and refused to shrink. She didn't fight for attention, she earned it with substance. And in doing so, she offered something rare, a glimpse of what it looks like when representation meets preparation, when lived experience fuels public service, and when someone refuses to be defined by anyone but themselves. These moments stick because they speak to something bigger. They challenge narratives, they lift standards, they leave people inspired, energized, and, most importantly, seen. That's the power of authenticity paired with excellence. And that's why what she did will be remembered not as a simple clapback, but as a turning point in how we measure power and presence. It's not about outshouting the opposition, it's about outthinking them. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room, it's about being the most rooted. That's what she brought. That's what landed. And that's what will keep echoing long after the moment has passed. Because when truth is delivered with that kind of clarity, it doesn't just resonate,